So are you thinking about moving to the Pascack Valley here in Bergen County, New Jersey? Let's talk about things that don't show up on those beautiful Zillow photos, and that's about flood risk. Honestly, this is a topic that I feel really passionate about because I wish that I knew more about it when I bought my house about 20 years ago. And it's important to be educated about what you can expect, especially if you're considering a property that might be in a flood zone. In this video, I'm going to break it all down for you. Where flooding tends to happen most here in the Pascack Valley, what it means for you if you're buying a house or if you're actually a homeowner and you realize, hey, I just got zoned into a flood area. And the other important piece to this is how you can actually protect yourself. So let's get right into it. And before we do, I'm actually coming to you from this beautiful little section of Westwood. This is known as the Pascack Brook, and this sucker really can create some issues. So let's talk about the geography of the Pascack Valley and why flooding tends to happen here. Many of the Pascack Valley towns have a lot of tributaries as well as streams that go through many of the towns here. You've got the Hackensack River, the Pascack Brook, and you've got the Musquapsink Brook as well. That's a tough one to say, which is in the Township of Washington area. So all of these little bodies of water are going through various parts of the valley. And what happens is lower lying areas tend to create specific flood zones. When you hear that there could be a potential hurricane coming or a nor'easter or inches and inches of rain, it actually can create a little bit of concern and anxiety, especially for someone like myself who lives in a flood zone here in Westwood. The thing you want to keep in mind is that FEMA will periodically rezone their maps depending on severity of water issues in certain areas. And one thing that I personally learned was that you might not be in a flood zone now, but could you potentially be in a flood zone if FEMA rezones? Absolutely. So just because you're looking at a house that might not be in one now, if you're actually kind of close to a zone, that doesn't mean that FEMA rezones later and then you wind up being in one. Mother Nature could care less what Zillow says about your backyard and the beautiful photos. If you're near a brook or one of these tributaries, you definitely want to check for floods. All right, let's talk a little bit about the towns here in the Pascack Valley and those areas that have some flooding issues. First up is the town that I live in, which is Westwood, New Jersey. I have a video about flooding that's coming across the screen up there somewhere, but that's personal experience and things that I've personally gone through when I purchased my house in Westwood. One of the things I wish somebody told me was that you potentially could be in a flood zone eventually, just based on where my house is located. So my house happens to be very close to the Pascack Brook, but I also have a high water table here in Westwood, which means that as it rains, the water table under the house rises. So I kind of have a double whammy, which really stinks, and I wish I knew more about that as I was purchasing my house. The Pascack Brook is a main culprit here in Westwood. You'll also find some flooding near Brookside Park, Bogart's Pond, and also in the Mill Street areas of town. The thing about Westwood, it's got an awesome downtown area, restaurants and shops, and I have another video that I talk about that as well, but you definitely want to keep your eyes peeled for certain parts of town that are in flood zones and get the education so that you know what areas of town tend to flood. All right, let's talk about Hillsdale next. The Pascack Brook doesn't just go through Westwood, it actually meanders through many parts of the Pascack Valley. A majority of it is coming from the Woodcliff Lake Reservoir. So Hillsdale also has parts of the Pascack Brook as well. So in the Patterson Street area, you'll find some flooding issues. If you know where King Shopping Center is, houses in that area tend to flood as well. The Beechwood Park area also has issues, and surrounding areas. You also will hear of some reports of basement flooding in many of these areas too. If you have questions, you can always ask me. All right, let's talk about Rivervale now, and guess what? The Pascack Brook goes through Rivervale as well. So there are parts of Rivervale Road that tend to get some flooding issues. You have some lower lying areas there. If you're near the golf course, homes in that area in particular, as you make your way into Old Tappan, for instance, also tend to have some flooding issues. But honestly, most of Rivervale is in a higher zone. If you're looking at homes near the Pascack Brook or near bodies of water, definitely do your due diligence and check those addresses to make sure it's not in a flood zone. All right, let's quickly talk about Emerson, just south of Westwood, and the Pascack Brook goes through Emerson as well. You also have some tributaries coming from the Oradell Reservoir, which could impact Emerson. So everything closer to the Oradell Reservoir and any of those tributaries coming out of that area, you definitely want to check those out. Those are areas east of Kinderkamak Road. Also, you want to keep in mind Soldier Hill Road. That tends to have some flooding issues as well. All right, what about Park Ridge as well well as Montvale. Both of those towns tend to be in higher elevations, but you're also kind of close to the Woodcliff Lake Reservoir and the Pascack Brook that makes its way from that area as well. So anything near those bodies of water, you definitely want to check those out. So just be diligent of that. And Park Ridge also has some parts of the brook that tend to swell as well. So again, do your due diligence, look for those addresses on FEMA as you're doing your research. All right, Woodcliff Lake, the biggest culprit in our area, especially for residents of Hillsdale, of Westwood, is the Pascack Brook, which is coming from the reservoir in Woodcliff Lake. The reason we're having some issues, and it's been ongoing for a while, is that reservoir, as it fills, there is a dam, and there's a debate, and I think the state is involved, if they need to open the dam at certain points, because as the water is rising in that reservoir, if they open the dam, it makes water go through the Pascack Brook, which impacts towns down from that reservoir. Huge amounts of rain can impact when that happens. From what I understand, like the state needs to get involved to open that dam, but when it does and how much they actually are putting into the Pascack Brook really could impact residents in Westwood, in Hillsdale, in Park Ridge. So I would say anything near that reservoir, you definitely want to check that out in Woodcliff Lake. And the tributary that's coming away from that Pascack Brook, look in those areas as well in Woodcliff Lake. All right, next up is the Township of Washington, which is closer to the Garden State Parkway. Anywhere near the Musquapsink Brook. That is really hard to say. And then areas that are closer to Westwood as well. Those southern sections where the Township of Washington meets Westwood, that tends to be low-lying areas. So what do flood zones mean to you if you're a home buyer, or if you even actually currently own, and then you wind up realizing, hey, I just wound up in a flood zone and I've been here for 10 years. Number one, flood insurance will be mandatory if you are in a flood zone. If you're getting a mortgage, you definitely want to keep in mind that your lender is going to want to protect that asset, so you potentially will need flood insurance. There are different zones and severity and risks as well. Talk to your lender if you are considering a flood zone, what the actual payment might be that's required, or the amount of coverage as well. Being in a flood zone can actually increase your homeowner costs, so not just with insurance, but you want to take some preventative measures as well. So for instance, making sure the sump pump is working correctly, or maybe having a second sump pump. Maybe you want to put in French drain. Maybe you even need a power generator to make sure that your actual sump pump doesn't stop working in a storm. And that's actually what happened to me. Our power went out. We didn't have a generator. My basement flooded. We had 1.5 feet in our basement and had to replace some very valuable things. About $14,000 worth of stuff was completely ruined. So it's definitely not fun to live through, but you want to make sure that you're prepared. Even if you're not technically in a flood zone, you still could have a flooding basement. When I work with buyers, I always tell them, especially when it comes to drain pipes, making sure that water gets away from the house. Have extensions on those drain pipes so that water doesn't just sit near the foundation and eventually get into the basement. And honestly, it could be a really big headache to clean all of that mess up. So get water away from your house, get some extenders on those drain pipes. You also want to see if a town might offer a mitigation program. So there is some mitigation programs we ourselves have been trying to get through, but honestly, it's a lot of red tape. It's been pretty confusing. Our town, for instance, knows that we are in a flood zone. They know that our house flooded, but there's really been no kind of solution for our situation and many homeowners here in Westwood and the Pascack Valley. So that's really kind of a slow-going process. Listen, at the end of the day, you don't want your finished basement to turn into a koi pond. For instance, we actually finished our basement, and we did that after the flood because we did need some office space. It was COVID, and we've really tried to make sure that we have some preventative measures in the basement. All right, so what are some ways that you can protect yourself, especially if you are looking at homes in a flood zone, or if you just want to know if a house is in one? What can I do? The first and most efficient thing that you can do is look at FEMA's flood map. Go on FEMA.org, type in any address, and you'll be able to see if that address is actually in a flood zone. One thing I talk to my buyers about, especially if they're looking in the area, is even if you're a little bit close to a zone, maybe you're a block or two away, that doesn't mean FEMA's not going to rezone it and you wind up in an actual zone. It could potentially happen. My story is it happened to us 5 years after we were living here. All of a sudden, we got a notification from our mortgage company that we needed flood insurance. The following year after getting that insurance, we actually flooded. And it was 1.5 feet in our basement. We were on vacation in Croatia, and friends of ours helped us out while we were away. Coming home to that was really stressful, and it was not fun to clean up and take care of. The second thing you can do to protect yourself is see if there are any disclosures in regards to the property you're considering. Thank goodness New Jersey passed a law last year that actually just made sure that there was transparency around flood zones in the the state. You might be aware of some of the issues around the Wayne, New Jersey area, Lincoln Park as well. The state passed a law to make transparency more apparent for flood scenarios. It's now a requirement, especially for listings, to have any kind of flood information in the disclosure or supporting documents. So talk to your agent, see if that information can be downloaded, or try to research as best as you can. Google's an amazing thing. Third thing you can do is definitely walk the property. If you're in the basement, look for a sump pump. If you're not familiar what a sump pump is, it's basically a pump that sits below ground level inside the floor of the basement. If it starts to collect water, it will push water out of the basement. So if you see one of those in the floor, it could potentially mean that not necessarily you're in a flood zone, but there could be some water collection, or the current owner has just created some preventative measures. The other thing to look for is around the perimeter of the floor, something called a French drain system. And you might see some grooves or indentations around the floor of the basement, which then will go to the lowest point, typically where the sump pump is located. A French drain is meant to take water away from those parts of the basement and put it into the tank so that it can be removed by the sump pump. So if you see that in a basement, it could be preventative. You might not be in a flood zone, but the owner might have taken some extra steps. The final thing you can do is work with an agent who totally gets it. Hello, my name is Bob. I live in a flood zone. I was kind of screwed over with flood zone information. Nobody ever told me when we bought our house that we could potentially be in a flood zone. So I want to make sure that you're educated as well in case you are purchasing that you might be in a flood zone. Because honestly, it's not fun. It's not a great situation to be in, especially your biggest asset, all of your valuables potentially. It's not a fun scenario to go through. So flooding doesn't mean that you shouldn't buy in the Pascack Valley. I just like to educate people to make sure that you understand that there are parts of this area that could be in a flood zone. What I want you to do is just make sure you've got your eyes open so that you can make an informed decision at the end of the day. I've lived here, I've dealt with it, and I help people every day navigate through this process. So if you're thinking about moving here to the Pascack Valley or Bergen County or northern New Jersey, feel free to reach out. I am definitely here to help. Or if you already live here and you want to know more information or how could this potentially impact the value of your home, reach out as well. I'm happy to assist. And please don't forget to subscribe, as I'll continue to bring you more deep dives on Bergen County and the Pascack Valley. So again, I'm Bob Jennis. I'm a local realtor here in the Pascack Valley in Bergen County. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys soon in the next video.